Happy days.
Yeah. How are you? How's life in Barbados?
Yeah, pretty good to be honest. We've been here now nearly a month. We kind of came over just before Christmas and just kind of settled back in now. The kids have started school. They're on Monday, so we're just settling back in to kind of like everyday normal life here now, and kind of out of the holiday mode back into kind of, I suppose, everyday mode, if you want to call it that. But no, it's really good.
Do
Escaping
you,
winter.
is it like a every year? Is it a family tradition?
Since COVID, uh,
Uh,
is how it kind of came about. We've been coming here for a very long time. Myself and my wife got married here. Our first holiday was here nearly 20 years ago. So then when our first child was born, we started staying in a really cool little spot just by a surf break. We were staying up on the west coast all the time, but I found myself just driving up and down all the time. So as the years rolled on, we found a really cool spot, and then we came here every January, kind of like just escaping winter style thing. And then since COVID, we came over for January, February, March, and April. And we've done it every year since. We found a little teacher for our three kids, a lovely teacher for our three kids, and they go there every day. And we just kind of escaped that really harsh winter because we're in Ireland apart from that all the time.
yeah.
So it's perfect balance.
That's amazing. Are you trying to maintain work while you're there? Or are you able to shut off and just kind of go into vacation mode?
Well, generally speaking, this time of year, work is normally quiet. So
Okay.
this time last year, I left my wife and three kids here, and I went out to Asia for the month of February. But generally speaking, we kind of always take the first few months of the year away from work, and just kind of like work normally dies down. And then as time goes on, kind of builds into the summer and then all the way into the winter and stuff like that. But the last kind of like 2 years have been pretty hectic for us work wise. So we're kind of coming to the end of that tour now that we're just doing. So it's kind of like, just slowing down from that. But the last few years, it's worked out well. So we
Yeah.
take it as it comes, really. It's not one of them scenarios where every year you can guarantee that we're going to be here for, the 4 or 5 months of the year. But if we can make it happen, we make it happen.
Good. It sounds like you've got it figured out. I just think about I have a small percentage of the obligations and opportunities that you have. And I find
Yeah.
myself still spread so thin that I don't actually take advantage of vacation and time off. And even if my wife and I schedule something, I will add in a podcast or two and then I'll be answering emails. And it's like I find myself on vacation, not actually able to shut off.
Yeah, I would imagine from your world, obviously, listen to all the different podcasts that you do. So you're spinning out 3 or 4 weeks. So that's got to be tough. And I often hear you talking about it as well, where you're like, well, you want to keep it going because you want to build the listenership, you don't want to lose the listenership. In my world, it's very different because we kind of, we approach it like in an album cycle. We make a record, which takes a certain amount of time, and then we tour the record, and then we go again. And that's kind of been our kind of system since we started all the way back in 1999. So it's very different. I think with you, I would imagine it's way more full time. I mean, really what we do is quite part time, I would have to say, especially now we have huge control over how we do it. In the early years when we first started, we were very much under control of a record label. We were very much under control of management going, you have to keep it going. You have to put a record out this year. You have to tour it this year. So it was never ending. But, we were young. We had the energy. It was very, very different. Whereas now
Yeah.
we're our own bosses, we're telling management how we want to run it. We're deciding what we want to do. There's 10 children between the four of us. So, we're not going to just pack up and go on the road for 2 years and never see them. So the way we actually do it is we would do, unless it's in Europe and around where we live, we won't really leave our family spending more than 3 to 4 weeks at a time, and
Okay.
then we'll come back for 3 or 4 weeks and then we'll go again. So we kind of get a really nice kind of rhythm going to it where you're having family time, but you're doing work at the same time. So, like I said, we're in a very fortunate situation to be running the way we're doing it.
Yeah. It took a while to get there for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, just as a side note, what were your thoughts on the Boardroom show?
Yeah, I thought it was awesome. You know, I mean, like I said when I met you guys that day, there's nothing like that on our side of the world. You know,
Yeah.
even down to surf shops. I mean, you guys have the riches when it comes to the surf industry over there. There's just not a lot of stuff for us to kind of go and, you know, spend a few hours looking at surfboards or looking at new materials, or, you know, I was even at the Greenock kind of area, and I was asking them about the fins, and, you know, they had this new hatchet fin, and I was, you know, asking all the information about that and being able to have that conversation, you know, just that whole vibe. I think my wife loved all the old school cars and down the back and stuff like that, you know, but just spend a few hours being able to just walk around looking at surfboards and looking at surf brands and all the different things that are coming out. And, you know, we were talking to one really cool guy who was like, you know, making really good packaging that was, you know, eco-friendly.
Yeah.
All of this mad different stuff, you know, the new wetsuits, the Kobe Plus wetsuits, just there was just so much to kind of do and so much to see. So yeah, for me, I was kind of like a little bit of a fanboy walking around kind of going, oh, this is cool, because we just don't have that back in Ireland. You know, we like there's probably 2 surf shops, 3 surf shops in Ireland that are a consistent, proper, you know, surf shop that's taken over. Everything is online now, which is great in one sense, but it's kind of lost its vibe of going into the surf shop and talking to the owner, or, you know, talking about surfboards, or learning about surfboards, learning about shapers, all that type of stuff. So yeah, it was definitely, the Boardroom show was really cool. I definitely recommend anybody to go and see it.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Did anybody recognize you as a celebrity in that environment?
No, no.
Isn't that nice?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, it's not really something I pay a huge amount of attention to, full stop. You know, I kind of feel like, you know, I'm 43 years of age. The whole idea of being a celebrity isn't really something that I think about on an often basis. You know, I think I more think about kind of, you know, what we do, and, you know, the performance element, and, you know, the creative element, all that type of stuff. I'm more in that kind of vein. I'm not really an Instagram guy, or, you know, I put up stuff on Instagram about what we're doing in work, but I'm not like on it all the time and posting all the time. I'm very kind of more backgroundy, chilled, relaxed about the whole scenario, but love what I do and very passionate about what I do. So for me, like, you know, I mean, I've spent lots of time in America as well, and, you know, our band have never had the success in America, unfortunately, that we have in the rest of the world. So it's kind of been normal for me to kind of feel like that, you know. And I think as well, like, you know, our band, we've had a lot of success in regions, but there's lots of regions that we haven't had success in as well, because I don't know, pop culture is very different to, you know, maybe rock culture or bands like that. You know, it's kind of like the record labels give you a big push in every country at the start. Some countries really latch on and some countries don't. And then when they look at, you know, the next cycle with the next record, they either push hard again or they back off. And, you know, they kind of pick their top 10 acts of the year and they push hard on those acts. So it's kind of different in a weird way, you know?
I've always thought, though, that's the perfect level of celebrity, like to be able to have access to the things that you want to have access to, and to be able to kind of design the life the way that you want to live it, but then live in anonymity when you want to as well.
Yeah.
You know, like maybe you get
I would
recognized
totally
in an
agree.
airport
Like,
occasionally, but you can go to the Boardroom show and live in anonymity.
absolutely. Even like if I'm in a restaurant somewhere and, you know, a super A-list celebrity walks in and just the whole restaurant swings its head, and, you know, people are shuffling around, get their camera phones out. Oh, I would hate that. That would be like the worst thing ever to me. You know,
Dude.
I'll never forget being asked a question by a producer one day saying, you know, if you could do it all without celebrity, would you do it? And like my answer was 100% yes. You know, like it's not about that. It's like I said, it's about the creativity. It's about the making something out of nothing for me. You know, like the idea of kind of like starting with nothing and then ending up back in the day with a CD, you know, with an album and artwork and, you know, the songs and the track list. And it's the same now. Most of our business is live now. So now it's about, you know, the production of the show, the lighting rig, the set list, you know, all the different elements that happens that makes a pop concert, because essentially that's what we are. We're a pop act. So, you know, it's all those different elements, putting that together to kind of like create this thing that people come and go, well, I spent my $50 to come and see this show, and it was money well spent. You know, that's kind of like my take on it all.
So where'd you grow up exactly in Ireland?
So yeah, I grew up in the west coast of Ireland, a place called Sligo, small little kind of sleepy town, small population. I grew up in a 3-bedroom semi-detached house, 3 brothers, 3 sisters, a mum and dad. You know, my mom was a housewife, my dad was an electrician, and yeah, very kind of simple, normal kind of upbringing. Yeah, so that's kind of where I came from.
I mean, when I think of Sligo, I actually think of music. I feel like music is such an important part of the culture. How did you discover music, or how did you discover an interest or talent for it?
My wife is running around in the background there.
That's okay.
Yeah, so music. So I have a brother who's 10 years older than me, and a sister who's 11 years older than me. And I suppose growing up, music in my house was a big thing. My elder brother, Gavin, he was in a rock band by the time he was probably 14 or 15, which would have made me 4 or 5. So, you know, he's lugging equipment in and out with his friends, drums, guitars, all that type of stuff, and playing in a band. And then as the kind of years rolled on, he started teaching piano. So he started teaching me piano. And then my brothers and sisters were all into music. My mum, funnily enough, she wasn't necessarily a big musician or anything like that, but she had us all in some sort of music lesson, whether it be a violin or clarinet or piano or guitar. We were all in some sort of a lesson. And then my dad was a big music fan, but as well, he didn't really play music. He just listened to music, but he always had music on. It was all day, every day. So yeah, definitely, I think Ireland has a huge musical culture, and growing up there, as you get older, every pub you walk into, there's live music every night of the week, you know. And my brother happened to be in one of those bands that was playing in the pub. So, you know, we'd go and see his gigs and stuff like that. And, you know, I think as the years roll on, then by the time I was like 12 or 13, the ideas started coming into my head about, you know, creating my own band and being in my own band. So I started up a few little rock bands when I was a kid, and, you know, kind of pushing my buddies, learn bass, learn drums, whatever it may be. And, you know, school musicals, kind of like school talent shows, all that type of stuff started coming into effect from the age of like 12, 13. So music was always there. It was always part of kind of my upbringing, you know. And then obviously, you know, the older brothers as well. I had 2 older brothers, 1 younger, but the older brothers were both in bands. Then the middle brother, Tom, he started playing in a rock band, and he was playing bass. And, you know, I was getting all my musical influence from them guys, you know, just all the way down through the years. I was an 80s, 90s kind of like music baby. That's kind of what I was brought up on, if you like.
Did you, when did you start to identify an interest in music or songwriting?
Well, I think really, like, you know, stepping on stage at kind of like 12, 13, playing guitar and singing, that was kind of like the whole idea. That was like, wow, this is it. You know, this is pretty cool. I'm loving this feeling. I'm loving this vibe. So I kind of wanted to keep doing that. And then, you know, as the years rolled on, I suppose by the time I was 13, 14, I kind of had like 2 or 3 kind of like rock punk bands kind of going. You know, I grew up listening to Guns N' Roses, Metallica. My first record was a Metallica album, far, far, far away from what I actually do musically. But, you know, so it was very kind of rocky growing up and stuff like that. And actually the band that I'm in now, 2 of the guys came up to me in school and was like, listen, we want to put this boy band together. What do you think about doing that? And I was like, boy band? What are you talking about? I'm not being in a boy band. I'm in like 2 or 3 rock bands. I can't be in a boy band. But then we started doing like musicals like Grease and Annie and Oliver and all this type of stuff. So I ended up being one of the T-Birds in Grease. I was Kaniki. Okay. And that's kind of how Westlife all started. We were the T-Birds in Grease, and we went out on stage one night, and, you know, we were doing things like Grease Lightning and Summer Lovin' and all these songs. And the reaction that we were getting was just blow away, you know, because in Ireland, well, I went to an all boys school. So the all boys school and the all girls school came together to put on the production of Grease.
Okay.
So, you know, we were segregated. It was very different. So when we actually got on stage and started doing that, it really kind of opened our eyes to what we could do. And at that point, then bands like the Backstreet Boys were starting to become really big around the world. And, you know, we were starting to pay attention to things like that. And I really liked the Backstreet Boys because I actually felt they had a bit of a rock element to it. Their actual main producer, who I met years later, a guy called Max Martin, who's a very famous songwriter, he is an absolute rock, like a madman. He loves all his heavy metal, all that type of stuff. So I could kind of feel that influence in their music, even though it's, you know, there's just a few songs that has kind of like guitar riffs and stuff like that. And so it kind of started opening my brain up to this idea of being in this boy band. So we went off then and we put the boy band together off the back of doing Grease, and it just snowballed out of nowhere. Just we made our own little record in our local town with a record shop. We put that out. We had like, you know, 1,000 people show up for our signing and things like that. And then all of a sudden we got offered by a big manager back in Ireland to take us on. He put a support in the Backstreet Boys. And then a year later, we signed a record deal with Simon Cowell.
Wow.
You know, so it was just like out of nowhere, you know, that age, the age of 12 to like 17, 18, it just felt like out of nowhere we were, you know, I was playing in these funny little bands into this Grease, into this boy band, to boom, signing a record deal and, you know, starting releasing music all around the world and having major success.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if your friends identified a business opportunity when they pitched the idea of, quote, a boy band. Because like when I think about like the way that you described Sligo, and there's all this music happening and your brother has incredible talent, you know, like everybody around has incredible talent. So how do you rise above that? And it might have been their epiphany was like, pop boy band comes with marketing. Like we can all start spinning that marketing machine, and it stands out as different than the other music that's happening here. I'm curious what their thought was to make that pitch.
You know, I don't necessarily think there was a major thought from a marketing perspective. I don't think any of us were in the headspace of, you know, what marketing was or how it was going to have an impact on what we did. I think it was just pure like, this is what we want to do. I think the fact that we were kind of like stage kids in a weird way, kind of brought that on a bit, you know, because we were all stage kids. That's the other thing I didn't say. We kind of all did. And when I say stage kids, we didn't go to like, you know, a school or anything like that. We all kind of did little pieces here and there. So we'd been on stage from young age. And I think, so just the idea of these bands were starting to blow up around the world. And it was like, oh, that there's a way of doing what we had done in Greece and stuff like that, but more as ourselves, rather than playing these characters or being these, you know, other people, if you like.
Yeah, fascinating.
So I think it's more that kind of way.
At what point in the storyline did you discover surfing?
I didn't really start surfing until I was about 24.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I was playing golf with my dad one day in a place called Strandhill in County Sligo, which is where I live now. And the golf course goes across the ocean. You know, the seventh hole is a beautiful hole across the ocean. And I was playing golf with him one day, and there was a load of people out surfing and stuff like that. And I was kind of like looking out at it going, wow, that looks really good. Like, I really want to give that a shot. And he was like, well, why don't you? And I was like, well, you know, I don't really know how to go about it. So he was like, well, why don't you pop down to that fella down in the village there, you know, a guy called Tom Hickey, really old school legend. So I was like, yeah, good idea. So I popped into Tom. I said, listen, I'm really interested in a surf lesson. And he was like, sure, when do you want to go? And I was like, now, you know, is now a good time? And he was like, yeah. So he says, you know, give me a half hour or whatever. We get the equipment out. So he pulled out the wetsuits and the big foamy boards and stuff like that. And out we went, and, you know, he pushed me into a few waves, and straight away I was like, wow, this is amazing. Just being in the water, I think more than anything. It definitely felt like this is a real enjoyable pastime. So then we came out of that lesson, and I said to him, you know, when can I go again? And he was like, well, next week. And I was like, well, what about tomorrow? You know, and he was like, oh, okay, my wife can take you out tomorrow. So his wife, Simone, took me out the next day. And same thing again. And I came in from that and I was like, all right, I want to book another lesson. And he was like, well, you know, I don't really have an awful lot of time. I said, all right, forget about a lesson. Give me that surfboard. Give me that wetsuit. And he was like, really? I don't really know if that surfboard's the right board for you. And I was like, well, doesn't matter. It'll do. You know, obviously having no clue about surfboards whatsoever, not having a notion as to what I was buying. But I ended up buying a decent surfboard in the end that I got back to. I didn't actually learn to surf on it in the end because it was too small, but
Yeah.
it was like an 8-foot mini mal style board. So I tried surfing on that for probably a good 3 to 4 months. But also, you know, I wasn't there all the time. I was kind of like flying away over to London for a few months, come back for a few days, over back, that type of vibe. And so I was splashing around for a good few months. And then I said to my wife, I really want to go on holiday to Hawaii, girlfriend at the time. And she was like, really, Hawaii? And I was like, well, yeah, we'd already been to Barbados and I, you know, had a little try of surfing in Barbados, but it wasn't very successful. So we went out to Hawaii. Kind of similar thing happened, you know, walked into local motion surf shop, saw a cool surfboard, bought a cool surfboard off the rack, paddled out at Pops in Waikiki. And this older lady goes, hey man, you know, you're not going to catch any waves on that board. And I was like, really? Why? Like, you know, and she's like, it's just too small. You need a big longboard out here. So I was like, yeah, whatever. Paddled out, tried to catch a wave, couldn't catch a wave for love nor money. Came back in probably a half an hour later, and there was a little shack right next door to the hotel I was staying in. And they had like these big 10-foot longboards. And I was like, give me one of them. Got one of them, went out. All of a sudden, boom, just started catching waves, one after the other. And I was like, wow, this is it. This is what it's all about. Went back in, said to my wife, let's go back to the surf shop. Back to the surf shop, got myself a really nice longboard, which I still have today, and surfed away on that. And then just was completely hooked from there on out, you know, just the feeling, the atmosphere, this whole new world was opening up to me. You know, surfing had never been a thing to me before, but just this whole new world had just completely opened up to me. Started meeting loads of new people, loads of new friends, you know, kind of hanging around, having a reason to kind of hang around, you know, like I used to come back to Ireland when I was from working and not really having anything to do, you know, just kind of like sitting around. But you know, I didn't want to sit in London either because I'm just hanging around in London. So now all of a sudden I had something to do that I really loved. I played a bit of golf and things like that, but you know, I had something that I really loved. So before I knew it, I was getting my teeth really stuck in. And then as the years rolled on, it's turned into like, you know, surf trips all the way to today, you know.
What kind of board was it that you bought in Waikiki, the longboard?
It was a T&C.
Oh, okay.
T&C 9-1. Raposa, I think, was the shaper.
Okay.
Yeah, lovely board.
What's interesting to me about both of those experiences in Ireland and in Hawaii is that how friendly everybody was. Like that woman to paddle up to you and be like, just give you advice kindly.
Yeah.
I mean, so many people talk about surfing as being uninviting, you know? And so both of your experiences seem to be warm and welcoming.
Well, I think 20 years ago, you probably know this just as much as anybody else. 20 years ago was a lot different to what it is now, right?
Yeah.
You know, 20 years ago, there was a lot less people in the water trying to learn to surf. So I think, you know, people were very friendly, you know, and even in my local village back home in Strand Hill, you know, people were very open arms. They were like, oh, hey, there's your man from Westlife. Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize you were, I'm just learning, you know, and they were like, what, you know, people were helping me out. You know, they weren't going, get out of the water coop, you know, right, which is what you'd probably get nowadays. So I kind of felt definitely I started at a really good time in surfing, you know, like I started surfing at a good time where people were still very open-minded and very, you know, enjoyed kind of like seeing somebody new and helping them out, you know. And I always try and do that now. Like I do spend a lot of time pushing my own kids into waves now. You know, I have a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old who absolutely love it. My 12-year-old is very competent now. So, you know, now I'm pushing my 8-year-old into waves. So, you know, and I always see other little kids out there and I'm like, come on, let me get you a wave, you know. And you know, I put them in the right spot and just give them a little push, and you know, you just see the smile on their face again, you know, and
Yeah.
the waves that we kind of surf, they're pretty crowded waves as well. So we're either on the inside or, you know, depending on the day, just trying to get these kids into waves. It's a lot of fun, you know.
How has surf tourism developed since the exploitation of some of those Irish slabs? I mean, I looked up waves where you live, and it looks epic,
Yeah.
but I never really saw any of that stuff in magazines when I was growing up. Like Ireland just seemed totally off the surfing map until like Mullaghmore and the big slabby waves really came onto the scene. So I'm
Yeah.
just curious how
Well,
surfing
you know,
has developed.
it's interesting because, you know, obviously, even listening to your guys' podcasts, and you mentioned Mullaghmore every now and again, and you know, Nathan Florence being over there and all that type of stuff. Like, I mean, that's happening all the time now. But it seems to be more happening in the big wave world rather than the everyday wave world, if you like. Performance surfing, you know, we don't have contests or anything like that. You know, the WSL or any of them guys, they're not anywhere near Ireland. I remember way back when I first started surfing, hearing whispers of the ASP back then saying that they wanted to come to a place called Boardroom and hold a contest, but all the locals were super against it for that reason exactly, you know, just overexposure. And but also I think like the cold water puts so many people off. Everybody's like, oh, it's cold. How could you surf in Ireland? You know, but let me tell you, when you're in Ireland, and I don't want to big it up too much, and you pull up and there's perfect waves, the last thing you're thinking about is the temperature of the water. Plus, wetsuit technology nowadays is so advanced that when you put a wetsuit on, you don't feel a thing. You really
Right.
don't. I mean, okay, there's days where if you spend an hour and a half in the water and the wind is blowing hard, whether, you know, offshore winds blowing hard and the water is cold, for sure, after about an hour and a half, you're going to get cold, your feet are going to get numb, things like that. But again, you're like, well, just one more, you know, that's kind of your mantra in your head. Oh, just get that one last wave, and you know, then I'll go in, you know. But even my 12-year-old son now, like, you know, for the last kind of like year or two, he's been kind of going, oh, it's awful cold in Ireland, Daddy, you know, but Barbados is so much nicer. And but now he's like, oh, but the waves in Ireland, Daddy, are so much better, and like there's so much less people, and you know, doesn't matter, you know, okay, we'll only surf for an hour. So, you know, he's starting to see the wood through the trees now as well. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like, but on saying that, you know, it's definitely grown a huge amount. I think COVID has grown surfing everywhere in the world dramatically. Ireland is kind of no different in that way, but you know, people are sticking with it. That's the one thing I will say. You know, a lot of people are sticking with it. I mean, our beach breaks are getting very crowded and very unorganized, and you know, there's no kind of like, again, Ireland is super friendly, so there's nobody out there going, hey, you're not supposed to be out here, you're supposed to be in there, or you know, everybody's kind of just like, all right, you know, just let him be. You know, it's very kind of relaxed in that manner. And I've kind of noticed traveling around the world and being in different places, surfing in different places, it's not like that everywhere.
Right.
So I think the Irish surfers are definitely getting an easy ride in comparison.
Are there any up and coming professional locals that whose names we should be aware of?
Well, I think the guy who's kind of made the most noise from Ireland across the scene is a guy called McDade.
Okay.
He'd be kind of in his 30s now, or yeah, just turning 30. He's been incredible. You know, he's kind of like was very much a contest for the first few years, and then turned free surfer. But you know, he's with Rip Curl, so he's had Mick Fanning in, and you know, Tom Curran was just in with him recently, and they're kind of like hunting all the slabs around the country and stuff like that. There's a few young kids that are really good rippers. There's a young kid called Joshua Carbis. He's about 13, 14 now. He'd be kind of, you know, chasing all the contests around Europe and stuff like that and doing really well. But yeah, I think there's not a huge amount of young kid surfers in Ireland. There's a huge amount of guys my age and kind of like maybe a few years younger. But I think as the years roll on, we're going to see more and more and more, because now you have all the dads teaching their kids. And I think I'm probably one of those first generation dads starting to teach kids how to surf in Ireland. Whereas before, I don't really know, there was, you know, it just didn't really seem to happen. It just kind of, there seemed to be big gaps in age groups. You might have a little pod of Groms coming up, and then there wouldn't be any for a long time. So I think it's becoming more consistent now. Plus the internet, everything has changed, right? We all
Yeah.
know that, like, you know, how we consume everything, it's changed so much. So I think people are starting to see it now as way more kind of accessible than it was, you know, 15, 20 years ago.
Um, Connor McGuire's Irish, isn't he?
He is indeed, yeah. So him and Garage would be very good friends, and
Okay.
it kind of, you know, they pal around together all the time, and they're chasing everything together. So Connor and Garage, I would say Connor got that kind of like ginormous freak wave there. I think it was about a year ago or something like that now. But yeah, so they will be very much on par with each other. But there's a few other guys like that as well. You know, I don't want to leave anybody out, but I think there's a few other guys kind of in that realm, kind of doing that type of thing, but it's all that really kind of heavy, slabby charging stuff. You know, it's not kind of like competition surfing, if you know what I mean.
I do. I'm curious why there's never been a big breakout star pro surfer from Ireland.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's because nobody wants to leave. Like Maui has kind of had the same thing where
Okay.
Oahu generates all these like, they become world class, well-known surfers, but Maui's generated a bunch of people who kind of get right to the cusp of that and then decide they don't want to go around the world chasing waves.
Yeah.
They'd rather just stay home and surf great
Yeah.
waves. And so I think about, there's been a couple guys like Fergal Smith or whatever who like definitely have the talent and they make a splash, but then opt to just stay home just because it's probably so
Yeah.
beautiful and there's waves.
I suppose it's interesting in a way. I think a lot of these guys nowadays as well are realizing that in order to kind of go all the way, like, I mean, what's all the way nowadays as well? Like, you know, to become a professional surfer, you know, what's the pinnacle of that? Is it to be, you know, the next number one in the world? You know, like, I don't know if there's a huge amount of money in that anymore, you
No.
know. So I think a lot of these guys are kind of seeing that and going, well, you know, I'm better off being a free surfer, living in Ireland, chasing the waves that I want to chase. You know, I think it's just because everything has changed so much as well, you know, that we're not seeing that hunger for like that chase to be the next world champ or whatever it may be.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is money in being number one, but being number five and below, there
Yeah.
isn't. I
Yeah.
mean, it's the haves and the have-nots. So yeah, being able to do it on your own terms and get great waves throughout the year and the peak of your surfing prime is probably the priority.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah.
Um, as it relates to kind of your timeline of your music career and everything, what was behind the band's split in 2012?
Um, yeah, I think that was just a point where, like, you know, we were very young when we started. I was 17 when we put it together, and by the time we hit 2012, you know, we'd been going for probably 13, 14 years. And I think we probably had just gotten to a point where we'd had enough. You know, we'd lived this kind of like fast-paced life from a very young age, always on the road, always moving around, you know, kind of on the chase all the time. You know, what's next? What's the next record? What's the next song? All of that type of thing. You know, we had done it for so long. I think it just kind of came to a point where we were coming to a natural end where we kind of felt like, you know what, it's better to kind of just go, we've had an amazing career. Let's leave it there. You know, 12 years, 13 years at the top, selling out concerts. Let's not be one of these bands that kind of like fade away as time goes on. Let's actually finish on a high. And, you know, we were still doing quite well at that point in our career. So it kind of felt like the right thing to do. So we kind of like got to a point where we were like, you know what, let's just leave it. We put on a big, massive farewell tour. It was a massively successful tour. I mean, it was hard. It was hard to accept. I think I was probably one of the only guys that was kind of pushing to go, boys, I think we're crazy here, but okay, you know, I'm not going to fight you all the way on it. So it was definitely hard. I think it was definitely hard to kind of like accept that we were letting this thing go. I think in the back of my mind, I always kind of knew that we'd come back to it at some point. But again, whether we'd be coming back to it at the same level or whether we'd be coming back to it for a moment or for whatever, I didn't know. But I think as well, I had just had my first kid, so I was kind of, that was kind of keeping me going a little bit. I kind of felt in my mind, well, we've just had a baby. This is probably a good time to kind of like, you know, look at the next phase of life, and kind of moving into that kind of maturity headspace as well. So yeah, I think it was the right thing to do for sure, looking back on it
Okay.
now, because we all kind of like needed that break. And it wasn't until we were probably a year or two into the break that I actually went, actually, this, I'm really happy we did this, because here I am, I'm back in Ireland, you know, living at home with my wife, my little boy, surfing as much as I wanted. You know, there was lots of times as well where I would be traveling around the world with my surfing magazine in my hand, or, you know, whatever magazine I had, dreaming about just being at home in Ireland. And I remember plenty of times, there's a little airport where we live, and there used to be a flight that would fly from Sligo to Dublin, and we used to take off on that flight every morning. And there's a lovely right-hand point break that it flies over. I remember just looking out the window, looking down at all these guys in the water, going, "Oh, I wish I was out there and not on this plane." So, you know, I definitely was starting to have that shift of not wanting to leave all the time and wanting to be home a bit more. But yeah, it was good timing. It was the right time, and I was glad we did it. And just being home and being able to surf for a few years and not really have to think about work, and not really have to think about my next step in life, you know, and just existing without this kind of constraints of what we had to do next.
Yeah. Fantastic. What was behind the reunion? And I mean, ultimately you guys reunited in 2018. So you had about 6 years there where you weren't obligated to do all the touring and everything. So what was behind the reunion?
What was behind it? What happened was myself and one of the other boys. So one of the other boys married my first cousin. So it'll give you an idea of how small it all is where we grew up. So one of the other boys married my first cousin. So there was a big family reunion, like a 20-year family reunion. And we were both there. And we started kind of like having conversations about the idea, not even, you know, a few drinks in, stuff like that, started reminiscing and talking about the idea. And then he got up and sang a song, and then I got up with him and sang a song. And then it was kind of like, oh, what's all this about? You know, we're kind of singing songs again all of a sudden. And then we had a little dinner, myself and himself and our two wives had a dinner, and kind of started reminiscing about all the old times and stuff like that. And that kind of led into the conversation of, oh, do you think we'll ever do it again? Yeah, why wouldn't we? You know, it'd be silly not to. I just kind of started the ball rolling from there. And then, you know, it was Christmas time, and a few invites started getting thrown around for a few Christmas drinks and stuff like that. And one of the other boys came along to that. And, you know, again, a few drinks in, kind of, well, what do you think? You know, you think we should do it again? And, you know, I wouldn't be against that, you know. And the ball just started rolling, and off we went. Before we knew it, the four of us were sitting in a room together, discussing a plan and a plot of how to come back, when to come back, all of that. And before we knew it, we had a record out and on tour again. It was just
amazing.
Yeah. I think a lot of it, it's so weird when I think about the story of Westlife and everything that happened. It just kind of feels like the stars were aligning for us bit by bit the whole way throughout our lives. And, you know, I've no doubt we've been very lucky in everything that's happened in our lives, but everything kind of felt like it was meant to be. Every time I look back on what happened in the past, it's like, well, actually that was meant to be, you know, because otherwise this wouldn't have happened and that wouldn't have happened. And, you know, we wouldn't be where we are today without it.
Well, the other detail that I'm curious about is there's not a lot of bands that just get along that well. Like the longevity has to be related to your guys' enjoyment of one another. I mean, so many bands break up just because there's infighting, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So what do you attribute that longevity to?
Honestly, I think that just goes back to childhood friendship, being friends from so young, you know, like Shane, one of my bandmates, like I met at 12, Mark, I met at 13, you know, and straight away we just became friends. And, you know, I think the fact that we all, you know, as the years rolled on, had the same idea and the same passion and the same want to make this thing happen, I think that had a huge impact. And like, don't get me wrong, there's been massive ups and downs, massive fallouts, massive bust ups, But I think, you know, the one thing that we've always managed to do is just to communicate, like, look, just get back in the room, just hash it out, you know, just say what you got to say. It doesn't matter, just get it out. So it's more kind of like a brotherly kind of relationship, I would say, than anything else between us. And that's worked. You know, I mean, when we did break up, there wasn't a huge amount of communication between us. We all went off and lived our own separate lives and did our own separate thing. But when we were together, it was very easy to be kind of yourself and, you know, not have to think about what you were saying or act how you know, think about how you were acting, you know. And you know, we party good together. I think that's a big thing, you know. Like if we go out and we have a few drinks after a gig, like we have a lot of laughs, and you know, we all make each other laugh and we hang out together. I think that's a lot of bands that we saw kind of falling away as the years rolled on. It's because they didn't hang out with each other. Like they had battles of egos amongst themselves, you know. And totally. I think for us, our battle of egos is what somebody else was doing. It was like, well, how do we beat them? How do we get that? You know, it was more about our strive to get there rather than how do I get that off of him in my band, you know. I think that was definitely had a good impact on us, that we had that hunger to kind of like, you know, beat the other act or beat the other band.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things that's happened since you guys reunited was COVID, obviously, and the whole music model seems to have changed, where your career is probably a lot more dependent upon touring now. Seems like you were probably always touring, but now it's really dependent upon it. Is that practical to sustain as you move forward?
For sure. I think like the music industry now has changed so dramatically that touring is what it's all about. If it's not touring, you know, it's very difficult for even for any new artist nowadays to kind of, you know, release a record and have success. There's lots of new artists having success with a song, you know, and having one big hit song, you know, on Spotify, or, you know, TikTok is starting to kind of like make all these people become really successful with one song, but nobody has a clue who the artist is. And then the next song comes along and the next song comes along. So, you know, and as well, you know, we come from an era where we made an album, where we put an album together and, you know, we put an album out and then we tour the album. Whereas nowadays it's just changed so much that our kind of system, because we have our fan base from back then, we're kind of just repeating the same thing in a weird sense. You know, we're putting the album out, fans are enjoying the album. Sometimes like we might not even put an album out, we might just put 2 or 3 songs out. And, you know, that's the new music, you know, and then we'll do a tour. But, you know, we're going out on tour, and the tour is really what it's all about. So, you know, going out on tour and people living through nostalgia in a weird way. You know, I think anybody of our age, we kind of all listen to the music that we grew up listening to. We're not, well, I don't know, speaking for myself, but like, I'm not really listening to a lot of new music. I'm listening to all the music that I grew up listening to. So, you know, to go and see the band that are out playing that music now, that's, I'm there, you know. But I think as well, go see new acts as well, don't get me wrong, but the world of touring is very nostalgic now, and that seems to be working very well for us.
Gotcha. What music do you listen to? What are you into?
Well, yeah, like I said earlier, I kind of grew up listening to rock music mainly. A lot of guitar bands, kind of, you know, everything from Pearl Jam, Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Green Day, all the way to The Doors, Elton John, Billy Joel, like who else? I mean, Jack Johnson, all that kind of like genre of music, kind of like pop rock, all of that type of stuff. I'm big into that. A bit of Coldplay nowadays. And then I'm listening to all the stuff that my kids are listening to, because they're the ones controlling Spotify nowadays in the car, not me.
What are they listening to?
Well, they're listening to all the kind of like Ed Sheeran stuff, and you know, kind of like all that kind of more modern pop music and stuff like that. My older boy's gotten mad into Coldplay at the minute, and then my middle guy Zeke, he's into a lot of DJ stuff and a lot of beats and stuff like that. So, you know, mad variations coming through the car, you know, but good vibes, good fun. You know, we're in the car and they're fighting over who gets to choose the next song, so it's always good from that perspective.
Interesting. Tell me the story of how you met your wife.
Yeah, so myself and Jody met, oh God, I'd say back in 1995. Um,
Wow.
yeah, she was signed to Simon Cowell as well. She was in a girl band, a band called Girl Thing. Sorry, 99. I've been corrected there in the background. 1999. She was 15, not me. So yeah, so she was signed to a girl band called Girl Thing through Simon Cowell as well. And we were Westlife were doing this show called Party in the Park in the UK, which is like a big kind of like summertime festival thing. And she walked through the room, and Simon says, "Oh, guys, I want you to meet my new girl band." And, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you, nice to meet you." And then Jody came along, and I was like, "Oh, hi, nice to meet you." And he looked at me and he goes, "No, no, no, kiddo, not for you." And I was like, "Well, why not?" And he was like, "Oh no, she's not for you. She's only 15," or whatever he said at the time. And I was like, "Oh, okay." But I spent the rest of the day kind of like chatting to her and getting to know her, and a little bit flirtatious and stuff like that. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I was like, she's only 15, I was 19. So we kind of remained friends for a good 3 or 4 years. And then a few years later, our band, she ended up, so her band kind of broke up after a year or two. And she ended up in a TV show as an actress, called Hollyoaks. So I messaged her and I said, "Listen, we're in town, we're playing a gig. Do you want to come down and see us?" So she was like, "Oh yeah, okay, great." So herself and her sister came down to see the gig. And I brought her in backstage to say hi before we went on stage. And, I'll never forget, she walked into the dressing room and I was just like, "Oh, okay, she's the one." And that was it. I kind of chased her for about 6 to 8 weeks after that. And then I said to her, "Hey, listen, do you want to come on holidays?" And we came out here to Barbados on holidays. And, that was it. That was our story. Got married here 5 years later in Barbados as well. And now we have 3 little boys. And, it's been a real fairy tale kind of scenario.
What was behind that moment where what shifted? What did you know?
Well, I think definitely having not seen her for maybe 2 or 3 years. The age difference, she'd gone from being, a teenage girl to like a woman, and the age difference was gone then. So when I was like, "Oh, she's a woman," and she was obviously very hot, which helped. But yeah, and then just our personalities always kind of clicked really well. We'd always kind of had a lot of fun together, and laughed a lot together, and kind of like, even if we were talking on the phone or a little text message here and there, it was always fun. It was never, so it was kind of like just a natural kind of, I get on really well with this girl. She was almost like one of the boys in a way. Even when I introduced her to my mates, it was like straight away she was able to slot in as like, one of the boys, and be able to hang out and, be part of the fun and part of the crack, as we would say. So yeah, it was very natural. It just kind of naturally flowed into us being together, and me in the back of my brain going, "Yeah, this is the one. She's the one."
You're right. It's a fairy tale. The setup, certainly in the meeting and all that sort of stuff, is fairy tale. But here we are. I think you guys got married in 2009, right?
Yeah.
So 15 years later, I guess.
Yeah.
Which is a successful marriage by anybody's measure nowadays. That's a significant amount of time. So what do you attribute the longevity of that relationship to? Give advice for any of us who are starting off.
I don't know. To be honest, I think we've just kind of like, we're right for each other. And I think that straight away, like we were together 5 years before we got married. And I kind of always had that in the back of my brain, that I wanted to be with someone for a long time before I got married. And I think we lived with each other for 2 or 3 years as well, which massively helped. But again, just communication, just like talking it out, just kind of like, being honest with each other, and just kind of like, just, if she's pissed off, she tells me. If I'm pissed off, I tell her, like, it's been plenty of times where, I want to go surfing, and she's like, "Forget about it. You're not going surfing. Like, we've got kids, mind the kid," it's, and vice versa. It's kind of like, just It's going out in the background here. It is true. It's not very often she says no to surfing, but yeah, but like at the same time, I do think it's very much just open relationships. You know, it's the same as the band. It's just like, I often find with people, like, I'm a bit of a peacekeeper in everything that I do in life. Like, if people are arguing or are getting hot-headed with each other, I'm like, just fucking talk to each other. Like, you know, just sit down and chat to each other. Just like be honest with each other. There's no point in building up all these thoughts and feelings with each other. If you just let them out and give each other the side of the story, and everybody has a little bit of give, you'll sort it out, you know?
It's great advice. People are afraid of confrontation sometimes. And then also, if you're in a relationship, whether it's the band or the marriage or whatever, and you have the idea that an exit is an opportunity, like there's something that this person can do that would offend me so much that I'm out of here.
Yeah.
You're inevitably going to find yourself in a situation where you're going to take that option. So just having those exits shut down and be like, it's okay to fight. It's okay to argue.
Yeah.
Give each other a little bit of grace and you'll get over it at a certain point after you express yourself. You're fine again, you know?
Absolutely. It's okay to disagree, you know? We all have opinions.
Yeah.
They all stink.
Exactly. Yeah. Does Jody have plans or aspirations to get back into her acting or music career as the kids become more independent?
I don't think so. I think at this stage in our lives, you know, we're very much a family orientated kind of unit. You know, it's all about kind of the kids and, you know, kind of bringing them up and, you know, kind of seeing what road they're going to take and being able to kind of like help them on that road, whatever road it is that they want to take. And, you know, our lifestyle is pretty good at the minute. You know, I think like we spend 4 or 5 months a year in Barbados, and then the rest of the time we're in Ireland, but we're over and back to the UK a good bit as well, because she's originally from the UK. So, you know, I think right now it's more about kind of like the family unit and kind of like just keeping the lifestyle going that we have. And, you know, like she helps me out an awful lot with the band stuff, with Westlife stuff as well, you know, and kind of she's in the background kind of like helping me with all that type of thing as well. So I think what we have going works really, really well for us. And I think, you know, if the right opportunity came up for Jodie, I'm sure she'd jump at it, you know, like, but it's not something that she's out chasing. You know,
Gotcha.
if she got made an offer to do something that she really loves or something that she's really passionate about, I think she'd definitely go for it. But yeah, she's definitely not chasing it.
What do your kids want to do? Have they expressed any real inclinations towards anything?
Well, our 12-year-old is kind of going through, I want to be a professional surfer, to a professional basketball player, to a musician, to I don't really know what I want to do, Daddy. You know, dad now, not Daddy anymore. You know, so I think in that, like the 8-year-old wants to be a DJ. That's his thing at the minute. You know, I'm going to be a DJ. And then our 6-year-old, he wants to be in a band with his older brothers. But, you know, at the same time, we're kind of feeding all these little thoughts into their heads, right? You know,
Yeah.
I think you see a lot of dads kind of like, and mums and dads, you know, they kind of always try and push their kids in what they know. And in a weird way, we know what we know, which is music and the entertainment world. And, you know, I see a lot of dads out here in Barbados in particular, you know, they're kind of big into surfing. So their kids are really big into surfing, and they're ripping and they're shredding and doing airs and, you know, all that type of stuff. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but that's what their dads know. That's why they're so good. They're on it all day, every day. They know how to video it and critique it. And, you know, we did that for a little bit, but it wasn't naturally us. So I think we kind of just stick to our lane and know what we know. But, you know, we let them decide. I think we're definitely the type of parents that look at it and go, well, they need to be pushed. You know, kids need to be pushed. You give a kid nowadays will sit on an iPhone or an iPad for 12 hours a day and eat sugar if that's what you let them do. So, you know, we're the opposite of that. We're like, we got rid of the iPads a few months ago completely. And, you know, the kind of Nintendo Switches kind of come in every now and again, but generally speaking, we're like, no, get in there, practice your piano, practice your guitar, go for a surf, play your basketball. What is it that you want to do? What are you into? Go and do that. You know, get up off your ass, as we would say.
Well, there's also parents who come from the music or entertainment industry who steer their kids away from it.
Yeah. I
just
get
because
that
they've had
too.
bad experiences in it, or there's a lot of access to vice and stuff in those
Yeah.
worlds.
It's kind of weird because when you say that, I understand what you mean by that. But at the same time, I kind of look at it and go, well, we've had good experiences. We haven't
Mhm.
had any negative experiences. So, and luckily, none of those vices have ever come into our world, and, they haven't really been around us. So we never really got involved in that. Yeah, we've had parties and probably drink a little too much here and there, but that would be kind of the extent of it for us.
Yeah.
So we've been lucky in that sense. Again, looking back on it all, we've seen lots of that go on around us, but it's just never really been part of our world. It's kind of odd, isn't it? Like, I look at it and go, well, if they choose that that's what they want to do, then we'll help them. If they choose that's not for them, so be it. It's not our choice. My parents, same way. I kind of had the same kind of attitude. My parents kind of had the same attitude where it was like, well, no, work hard at what it is that you want to do. So it's more about teaching kind of like a work ethic than anything else. Work hard at what it is that you want to do, and you'll get there. To what level, who knows? But if that's what you want to do, off you go and do it.
It's a great point, because ultimately I think with a proper upbringing, your kid can navigate whatever world they end up in. So if they are in entertainment, there is access to vice that they wouldn't have otherwise. They know how to steer away from it or around it.
Yeah, listen, it's in every world, right? It's
Yeah.
there, it's out there. That's the world we live in nowadays. So
Yeah.
if that's what they want to get their hands on, I'm sure they'll do it somehow.
Yeah. 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 Well, what surf media do you follow nowadays?
um, I listen to all your podcasts, which are awesome, by the way. I have to say,
Thanks.
well done and all of that. I know you've been chipping away at it for a very long time, but Stab Magazine, I like Stab Magazine. I subscribe to them. Surfer's Journal, I subscribe to that. WSL, for all its faults. I know you guys give it a hard time, which I agree with a lot of the things you say, but I still enjoy it. I still enjoy the platform. I still enjoy professional surfing. I think it was probably the thing that really got me into surfing was, having the WSL or the ASP back then. So I follow that a bit. And then the kids are into Jamie O'Brien and Kyle Lenny and all that type of stuff on YouTube, and Nathan Florence, John. So, that's on all the time. They come in and that's their go-to kind of stuff on the TV, that and basketball. But from a surfing perspective, that's what they're into. So, yeah, a Carve magazine back in the UK, I make sure I buy that because, it's the last magazine that we have left. When I first started surfing back in Ireland, there was even 2 Irish surfing magazines, and obviously they're gone by the wayside now. So I still support Carve magazine. I buy that every month. Or every 2 months now it comes out. So yeah, and all the Instagram stuff. I follow a lot of surfing stuff on Instagram. I think it's probably the thing that I follow the most is surfing on Instagram. So that's kind of what I kind of into.
In regard to Irish kind of industry, are there many board builders in Ireland?
There is actually, yeah. There's quite a few now. There's one guy close by us. There's 2 guys close by us, Wax On Surfboards and Graham Doolan Designs. They're kind of like 2 local shapers. A lot of the local guys are surfing their boards. There's one guy down on the Hinch, Luke Surfboards. There's a few guys up in Bundoran and Donegal. They're kind of like starting. I forget the name of that guy, but he's just kind of started. So there's a few, but I think the same as I said earlier on, the access to surfboards for us now is really easy. Like, there's so much stuff coming in from Europe, Euroglass, all these kind of like board shapers that are making boards for Lost and for all these different brands that are coming out of America. So we have real good access to surfboards. Like, I compare it to Barbados, like they really struggle here in Barbados for access to surfboards. And I kind of always look at it and go, wow, like it's so easy for us over in Europe to just get our hands on whatever board we want within 2 days. It's in your doorstep,
Right. Yeah, interesting. Well, I'm glad to hear about those local board builders. I was talking to Stephen Bell a while ago, and he was saying that he was running a truck up to Ireland every few months.
Yeah.
And I think he was delivering finished boards, but he was also delivering blanks.
Thanks.
So that must have been who he was delivering to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm sure there's way more than the guys that I just mentioned as well. But yeah, I mean, Stephen Bell, he's from Euroglass, right? He does the Euroglass stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I actually think I was on one of his shipments recently. I got one of his boards. But I got a lovely a board called a One Bad Egg, which is a great surfboard. It's kind of like the Sea I Mid, but slightly different. But that came out of Euroglass as well. Pips is the shaper there, Mark Pips. But yeah, so we get a lot of boards, but there is definitely board shapers coming up in Ireland and kind of like,
Good.
you know, pushing through.
Good. I like to see that. Whose surfing do you admire nowadays?
Well, all the big guys, like, you know, John obviously is still top of the pile for me when I watch what he does, and you know, he's incredible. I have to mention a few of the Barbados guys. Josh Burke is an amazing surfer here from Barbados. I'd be good family friends with them guys, and you know, I suppose you know, all the pro surfers, you know, I'm watching them all the time, but I think between John, Josh, what Kyle Lenny does is incredible. I mean, he's a madman, and Nathan Florence as well. He's a madman. But yeah, all the kind of everyday professional surfers, I definitely like all the stuff that they're at. It's hard for me to think of them off the top of my head, but
Josh Burke is a great call out because his name doesn't get mentioned enough, but every time I see him surf, I'm like blown away. He's as good as any other junior coming up right now.
Yeah, he really is. And, you know, it's only a matter of time before he gets his kind of break. I feel like he's had a bit of bad luck in the last few years. You know, he's chasing the kind of the Challenger Series, and, you know, it's tough to see them guys and what they have to do to try and push through. You know, they really have to slog it to kind of push through and to try and get into that top 40 nowadays. And there's so much competition out there, and there's so much talent out there now as well. You know, it's definitely difficult for them.
And there's so much variable in the contest format and structure that it's kind of beyond your control. Even if you are the most prepared, the best surfer, you can still lose round one.
Absolutely. And, you know, I've watched Josh a few times kind of like go into heats and bowing out in round one, and you're like, oh man. And I know I've been here, and he's flown, you know, 2 days to get to that contest, and straight away round one, and he's out. And just, you know, you feel heart-wrenched for him, because, you know, you're standing here on the beach watching him surf here, Soup Bowl or wherever it may be, and it's awe-inspiring, you know, like as good as what Kelly is like when Kelly is here surfing. You know, like Josh is out there, if even better than Kelly nowadays, you know. So it definitely is kind of like magic to see that happening, and then to see them go out and just have their heart kind of like torn out of them like that. It's such a tough industry. It
really is. Yeah. I'm glad that there's more avenues and options now for guys like that to pursue and make a living off of it.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, as you age, how has your diet and exercise changed, or are you doing anything to kind of manage it?
Yeah, well, last year I definitely kind of let it all go a little bit, you know, out on tour, living in hotels, you know, drinking probably a little bit too much after the gigs, stuff like that, you know, timeline, you know, being jet lagged as well. You kind of find yourself after the gig just going to a restaurant that'll stay open for you in the hotel, and it's like, all right, yeah, come on, let's have a few drinks. And before you know it, you're there, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and, you know, it's 7 o'clock at home. So now you're kind of back into the right, not 7 o'clock, but 11 o'clock at home. So you're kind of back into the right time zone. So that definitely took its toll on me last year. And by the time I hit kind of like October, November, I probably put on like 12 pounds or so. So I kind of started hitting the gym, knowing I was coming back out here for late December. I started hitting the gym and started shedding the weight, and I've stuck on that routine since. You know, I've kind of been in the gym a good bit and just kind of like training a good bit. Plus I'm getting to surf here every day, which helps a lot, because, you know, surfing is a great calorie burner, as I'm sure you know. So just getting my fitness level back up and just being back at that, and changing my diet, you know, just cutting out all the crap, cutting out the crisps and the junk and the, you know, the bread and the pasta and the rice. Just it's not that hard to do once you get into a rhythm of it. You know, you don't even want it. You don't even think about it after a while. So yeah, no, I've been on a good path. It's more of a case of how long can I stay on it before I fall off of it again. But I'm
Right.
determined to make it a lifestyle rather than a moment in time this time around, you know.
You can get away with it doing it a moment in time when you're younger, but
Yeah,
I'm 43 now as well. And it's like, yeah, it needs to be a lifestyle ultimately.
it
Recovery
does.
times take a lot longer when you have those bad nights or drink too
Yeah.
much or whatever. What
Oh,
about
listen, I'm flat on my back for a day after a night drinking nowadays. It's like, forget about it. So nowadays, that's slowed down dramatically as well.
and it's not worth it anymore. You know what I mean? Like it's not the night out isn't as fun as it used to be. And then the
Oh,
recovery takes so long. And I'd rather spend that recovery day surfing or doing something active.
absolutely.
So it's just not even worth it. What
I
about
kick myself if I put myself in that situation, I kick myself bad. I'm like, never again.
yeah, exactly. Have you had to incorporate any stretching or yoga or anything like that as you get older?
I've tried. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. You know, I think that's the one thing that's kind of I know is letting my surfing down a lot is just the fact of my flexibility isn't that great. But and I have tried, and my wife is really good at yoga. She actually done a yoga teaching course there a few years ago during COVID, and she's tried with me as well. I do incorporate stretching into my workout at the end now, but it's more like a 5 minute stretch rather than it should be a 20 minute stretch. And properly stretching for what I do. But I definitely have slowly gotten better at it and slowly become a little bit more flexible. So I think that's definitely a big thing for me this year is to kind of work on my flexibility and get that going. I think at our age, it's what's going to what's going to be the difference between whether I'm surfing in 20 years or not. You know, if I keep it,
Yeah.
whatever about the fitness, I just feel like the flexibility, you know, or the sore lower back or whatever it may be, you know, just that all comes from the same thing, you know, a good core and flexibility. And hopefully I'll still be able to do it in 20 years.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. That's where my head is at. And the way that that translates in my surfing is, I think, reaction time.
Yeah.
You know, if I'm not fully limber and stretched and resilient in that way, I'm just like a little bit slower to my feet. I'm a little bit
Yeah.
slower to respond off the bottom or off the top. I'll hit it, like do a turn, and the fins might set free a little bit and I'll just eat it at that point. Whereas I used to be able to kind of respond in a minute and recover and kind of come out of
Yeah.
it. So in those moments when I fail in the water, it's real motivation to then do the hard yards on land to not be in that position again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, you know, I don't know if I ever got to the point where I was putting the fins out the back of the wave, but at the same time, you know, I definitely feel like the more I'm doing it, the easier it is. And the hardest part for surfing for me is going away from it and coming back to it. I
Yeah.
mean, it's so difficult if I've been away from it for a few months and then come back. It takes me a good month or two to kind of like get back to where I may have been at. But now I feel like in the next year or so, I definitely have the time to be able to do that. And I have the time to be able to push myself and, you know, put myself into more critical waves as well. Like, I mean, here in Barbados, we have Surfboard and it's such an amazing wave, you know, and even there just before Christmas, we had probably like 5 days of it being super glassy, which is really unusual for this time of the year. Normally it's onshore and mush, but this year it was super glassy and just getting out there and getting the feeling for that, you know, I think when you get one or two good waves under your belt, your brain just automatically goes, "Oh, okay, yeah, now this is giving me the fire to get home and do the stretching and go for it the next day, you know, and sit deeper and try and find the barrel and try and get in there. And doesn't matter if you get smashed, you're fine, you know.
Yeah.
That whole kind of headspace definitely comes with doing all the other stuff. If you're not doing the other stuff, you're not going to get that headspace, I find, you know.
Totally. Whose boards are you riding while you're down there?
Um, I have a Christensen. It's a board called a Surfer Rosa. I surf that quite a lot, which is
Yeah.
like a 6.0 kind of like thruster. And then I have the One Bad Egg that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. Then I have one or two long boards here as well, and I kind of mix up my boards are a disaster because I just kind of feel like, you know, the marketing of surfboards is so good nowadays. They're just always telling you this board is going to make you such a better surfer. And, you know, sometimes I fall into that category, but I do go back. You know, I was surfing a few of the Slater design boards for a while, and they were going really good for me, actually. You know, I was on a Cymatic for a while. That was going really good. But then I found when I went away from surfing to come back to that, I was finding it quite difficult. I have a hand-shaped Bob McTavish that I got from Bob, that I absolutely love. He's actually making me another one as well. I actually spent, I did a boat trip with Bob McTavish out in the Maldives a few years ago, which was epic.
Did you just happen to be on the trip with him, or did you schedule it together?
Well, so he had a trip running every few years, where you go on a boat and you'd buy a spot on the boat. So I did that one year. And the reason why I kind of went for his is because I didn't want to be going out to somewhere like the Maldives and be with a bunch of like 18-year-old rippers who were like just chasing like heavy barrels all the time. And I know the Maldives doesn't get that heavy now that I've been there a few times, but so I kind of like got onto this like travel company, and I was like, you know, I want to do something that's not so kind of like full on, and I don't want to be chasing like crazy waves. So they suggested the Bob McTavish trip. So I went out in that, and that was an amazing experience, I have to say. He's such a gentleman. He was so warm, and so kind of like every day at the end of the surf, he'd sit down for dinner with everybody and, you know, tell stories of his history and his past, and, you know, give tips one-on-one and talk surfboards and explain surfboards. You know, he was just so knowledgeable and just kind of like so easy to pass that knowledge on. And, you know, he's actually stopped doing them now, because I'm devastated that he stopped doing them, because I've really looked at it and gone, oh, I'd love to do another one. But I see Barton Lynch is doing them now, so I might do one with him.
Yeah, that's right.
Cool. Well, Shane Dorian was doing them with his kid as well for a while, with Jackson, but they've kind of stopped doing it as well, I think. I was hoping to bring my little boy on that one, just to kind of, for inspiration, you know, just kind of see all of that. So, but yeah, so I've got a Bob McTavish as well, and he's shaping me a new one at the minute. So that's kind of probably going to end up being more like wall art than anything else. The new one that he shapes. What's
amazing about surfing is that our early pioneers, like McTavish, are not only still active in terms of they'll build you a board, but they're still surfing, and you can go surfing with them and have these experiences. You know, it's like the sport is that young, and board building is that young, that we still have access to these guys.
Absolutely. And to see Bob surf as well at his age, I was blown away. Like, you know, he was out there on a longboard most days, but he was still managing to find a barrel. He was still managing to kind of go for it, you know, catching more waves than anybody else. Just the natural ability was just, you know, it was pretty cool to see.
Yeah, probably 60 years worth of surfing.
Yeah.
You know, it's crazy. It's inspirational, actually.
For sure. Absolutely.
Well, in closing, what's next for Westlife or your personal music life?
Well, we've actually got our first ever North America tour coming up in March. So that's pretty exciting. I think it's been weird for us with America, because we never broke into America. We kind of got caught up in this whole kind of record label thing with Clive Davis. I'm sure you've heard of Clive Davis. We signed to Clive Davis in America, and he put out our first record, and we were doing really well, and it was going really, really strong for us. But then he got let go from the record label that he was with. He was with RCA Records at the time. I'm not exactly sure the history as to why he got let go, but he got let go. And the only artist, I remember watching this documentary years later about it, the only artist he was able to take with him was Whitney Houston. So he took Whitney Houston, and he went off and he started up a new record label. And while he was doing that, we stayed in RCA. He put his own boy band together, and he took two of our songs, two Westlife songs, and gave them to this band and released those songs, and they became very successful. They're a band called O-Town. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
Yeah, I watched that documentary too.
Yeah. So we should have been the O-Town in America, but it never happened anyways. So we left America alone. We kind of, you know, Simon Cowell was our main record label boss, and he was like, look, guys, just forget about it. Just leave America alone. We'll go back at it in a few years. We've got so much success in the rest of the world. Let's just keep hammering at that. So we did that for a few years. We went back to America then a few years later, and, you know, we put a record out to all the radio stations around the country. We had a big record label push again, you know, shot a new music video, all of that type of stuff. And all the radio stations were loving the tune. It was a song called World of Our Own. they were loving the tune. They were getting back in the label going, oh, this is such an amazing song. You know, this is definitely a hit. Who is it? And they were like, oh, it's this band called Westlife. And they were like, oh, no, we're not playing any more boy bands. We're done with that era of music, you know, because by then, Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, 98 Degrees, O-Town, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, all these kind of like pop acts. That's all it was for probably 6 to 8 years in America. So America were just kind of, I think that the industry had just kind of gone, okay, it's time for a shift. And they started playing more like Maroon 5 and all these types of bands. So we kind of got caught there. You know, we kind of missed our chance. So we left America alone, and that was fine. We were happy with it. But then as the years rolled on, up until last year, our manager said, well, look, you know, why don't we just put on a theater tour and see how it goes? You know, put on a few shows in the kind of like Irish American states and see how they go. So we were like, all right, let's try it. So we put on the shows, and they all sold out within minutes. We were blown away. You know, the agent was kind of saying, oh, we could have done more, but we didn't leave ourselves enough time to do more. So we got Radio City in New York, which is an iconic venue that we're going to be playing in March. And again, it all built around St. Patrick's Day, because they kind of thought, well, look, if we build it around St. Patrick's Day, it's very Irish, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, they've all sold out. We've got 3 shows in Canada, Boston, New York, and Chicago. So that's going to be a great little run. Then we go down to South America. We've got a few shows in Mexico and Brazil. And then we take a break for a little while. We may have another China tour coming up in May. And then that kind of ends this tour that we're doing right now, which we call the Wild Dreams Tour, which was the last record that we put out. And I think we kind of see maybe a bit of a break coming for us for maybe a year or two. And then we'll kind of gear up for our 25th anniversary in 2025, believe it or not. So, yeah. And,
Crazy.
you know, out we go again, hopefully, and do another world tour. And, you know, in America, they're talking about pushing us into bigger venues next time around. So hopefully Madison Square Garden will be on the cards for us. That would be a box ticking moment.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Still growing after all
Still
these
growing.
years.
This tour in particular, and we were just discussing this on our way home for Christmas, has been the most successful tour we've ever had. We've done 130, 140 shows so far around the world. You know, wow. I think about 1.5 million, 1.6 million people. And by the time we finish, we might scratch the 1.8 million people on bums on seats, which is definitely going to be the biggest tour we've ever done.
Well, congratulations. People definitely love you. And when I mentioned just to Scott on Spit that we had met at the Boardroom show, I just kind of mentioned it in passing. I got a bunch of DMs and emails from people, and they're like, dude, you got to interview him. We would love to hear that. So
when you said that to me, you know, when we were chatting, I was like, really?
Yeah.
In the surfing world, I was quite taken back by that. I was like, all right, you know, I mean, I'm all for it. And, you know, I think like in the surfing world, I've always kind of like just seen it as a hobby and stuff like that, you know, and obviously listening to your show, everybody that you interview. I know you had Chris from the Foo Fighters on at one point as well, but like, you know, it's all real surfy orientated. So I've always kind of, when you asked me, I was like, wow, okay, yeah, that's a bit of an honor, you know, to be asked to do it. So
it's because they're fans of yours. Like and even a lot of them are Americans who are messaging me. Yeah, right. So you definitely have a fan base here for sure.
Yeah, it's weird. It's mad. But,
it's cool, man.
Whoever sent in that message.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to do this. I know your kids are getting off school in a few minutes here, so I'll let you get back to them, but I really appreciate you taking the time.
Much appreciated, Dave. It's been lovely talking to you, man.
Yeah, you too. Studying up for this interview too made me want to plan a trip to Ireland. So if that ever comes to fruition, I'm going to definitely hit you up.
Absolutely, man. Anytime. I always say best time of year to come, September, October, kind of hurricane season. You know, the hurricanes move up through the Atlantic, light up our west coast, and it's warmer. You know, you're still being a 3 mil wetsuit, but it's warmer and the waves are always good. You know, generally speaking, winds are good that time of year as well.
Yeah, I did a trip there probably when I was 20 years old with my parents, but I didn't. So I've been there and I loved it, but I didn't do any surfing. And then my wife actually lived outside of London for a little over a year. Okay. And she's been wanting to go back and do a UK trip. So I feel like now we have a couple of reasons.
Yeah, well, they're too close to not go back, to not kind of come across. You know, you're only talking about a 50-minute flight to get to where we live, you know. There's a
Yeah.
great little airport actually by us called Knock Airport that flies into London every day, 3 or 4 flights a day. And then 40 minutes later, you're at the coastline. It's been absolutely a savior for us.
Amazing. Okay, cool. We'll start looking at what that looks like. All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this again, Kian.
Not at all, man. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
David.